Welcome to True Echo, where real stories reveal powerful truths. Today's story will leave you breathless. It's not just about law or justice, it's about a moment so raw, so human, it made a courtroom full of strangers sit in stunned silence. When a judge ordered a paralyzed black veteran to rise during sentencing, no one expected what happened next. Stay with us. Because what follows will challenge everything you think you know about strength, dignity, and what it means to truly stand for something. In Dothan, Alabama, the morning air was thick with something heavier than humidity. Tension. The kind that settled in the bones of every person packed into Courtroom 2B of the Houston County Courthouse. It wasn't just curiosity that filled the wooden benches, it was reverence. Not for the law, not even for the judge. But for the quiet man sitting at the defense table in a wheelchair, Osmond Jarrett. He was no stranger to the locals. They knew him as the man who handed out fruit to kids walking home, who raked up neighbors' leaves before sunrise, who always wore that old veteran cap with quiet pride. But today, he wasn't Uncle Oz from Reeves Avenue. Today, he was the defendant in an assault case that divided the town. And seated just behind him, nervously clutching a half-zipped backpack, was his 15-year-old niece, Carlin, the girl at the center of everything. Judge Renata Greaves took the bench, cold and unreadable as ever. She had a reputation, never cruel, but never moved. Her eyes scanned the courtroom, not looking for emotion, but order. Flipping through the sentencing file, she paused only once before lifting her gaze. "Mr. Jarrett," she said, voice low but resonant. "Please rise." The room didn't breathe. His public defender, Reggie Vallon, immediately leaned in. "Your Honor, Mr. Jarrett is paralyzed." But the judge didn't look at him. She was still watching Osmond. And without a word, Osmond placed his palms on the arms of his wheelchair. His face tightened, not in defiance, but effort. Muscles in his shoulders bunched. Arms trembled. Slowly, with every ounce of force he could gather, Osmond pushed himself up. Gasps caught in throats. Chairs creaked under shifting weight as everyone leaned forward. He didn't make it fully upright, but he rose. Just enough. Enough to be undeniable. Then his legs buckled. He sank back into his chair with a breathless collapse. Silence. Not even the court reporter's keys moved. Judge Greaves stared. For the first time in her judicial career, her chin quivered. She stood. Removed her robe. And walked out of the courtroom. No one moved. Not the bailiff. Not the cameras. No one. Just Osmond, breathing heavily, sweat dotting his brow. Carlin leaned forward and touched his shoulder, whispering something that made him smile, for the first time that day. And that's when people started realizing this wasn't just a case. It was something else. The courtroom remained suspended in stunned silence even after Judge Greaves left. People glanced at each other, not with confusion, but with a deep, unsettling awareness that something had just happened. Something rare. Something that didn't fit into statutes and sentencing codes. When the judge returned, she looked different. Still composed, but not armored. Her voice had lost that stainless steel edge as she murmured, "We'll take a 15-minute recess." Outside the courthouse, the air swirled with tension. Reporters whispered into microphones. Spectators blinked back tears. Some didn't know why they were crying. They only knew they'd witnessed a man do something impossible, not to escape judgment, but to confront it, eyes forward, spine trembling. Back at home, Osmond Jarrett was not the type to seek attention. After 3 tours in Afghanistan and a blast that stole the use of his legs, he returned to Alabama without ceremony. He didn't talk about the war. Didn't hang medals on the wall. He simply lived. He raised his niece, Carlin, after her mother, his younger sister Janira, died from a stroke. She was only 10 then, sharp-eyed and shy. He cooked her breakfast every morning. Waited at the bus stop in rain or shine. Watched black and white westerns with her on weeknights. She'd always pretend to love the boiled egg he included with her toast and banana, until he caught her slipping it to the neighbor's dog. They lived simply, peacefully. But the world outside didn't always return the kindness. The day everything unraveled started like any other. Carlin stayed late for her school science club. Osmond rolled over to Walter's Market to grab groceries, eggs, green beans, bread. He expected to be back before sundown. Instead, he rolled out of the store and saw Carlin frozen near the edge of the parking lot, her hands behind her back, her lips moving but no sound reaching him. A large man, mid-30s, red-faced, arms folded, was standing in front of her. A presence too large, too loud, aimed at a girl too small. Osmond called her name once. She didn't answer. He rolled closer. Just enough to hear the man's voice. "I don't want people like you messing around here. You hear me? We don't need this kind of trouble." Osmond's heart didn't race. It froze. Not from fear, from recognition. He'd heard words like that before. But never at his niece. He spoke calmly, "You got something to say it to me." The man turned. "You should teach your niece some manners. She bumped into my nephew and didn't say a word." Carlin whispered, "I said sorry." But the man ignored her. Took a step toward Osmond. "You think sitting in that chair makes you untouchable? You think?" The man never finished the sentence. Osmond moved. A single, sharp swing of his palm, fast, controlled. The man stumbled. Fell. Blood pooled at the corner of his mouth. He clutched his face, stunned. Inside the store, a clerk had already called the police. Osmond didn't run. Didn't shout. He waited. When the officers arrived, he simply said, "I struck him once. He was threatening my niece." He asked only one thing before they took him: "Can someone check on Carlin?" The arrest sent waves through Dothan like a stone dropped in still water. Some whispered, "He snapped." Others said, "I would have done the same." But Brett Donegan, the man Osmond struck, wasn't just a loudmouth. He was connected. His brother held city contracts. His father had friends on the zoning board. And soon, charges were filed. Second-degree assault. Osmond's public defender, Reggie Vallon, was fresh out of law school. He came to Osmond's home the next morning, still clutching his briefcase like a shield. "Mr. Jarrett," he said, "I need you to tell me everything. No skipping details." They sat at the kitchen table. Carlin hovered silently in the hallway, biting her hoodie sleeve. Osmond stared at his weathered hands. He cornered her. "I didn't think, I just saw her backing up. Something old in me woke up. You said he made a threat." "I said he made a threat. I didn't quote him." Reggie sighed. "We'll need the footage. And witnesses." "There were people," Osmond said. "But I don't want to drag them into it." "With all due respect," Reggie replied gently, "they're already in it." That afternoon, Reggie reviewed the footage. Grainy. Tilted. Osmond barely visible. Brett's gestures wild. Carlin pinned. And then, the strike. So fast. So precise. No wind-up. No hesitation. "That's the quietest punch I've ever seen," Reggie murmured. But quiet or not, it left a man with a fractured cheekbone and two loosened teeth. Brett filed a civil suit before the week ended. The court of public opinion was split. And the real court wasn't known for its mercy. Especially under Judge Renata Greaves. Judge Renata Greaves didn't believe in courtroom spectacle. She believed in facts. Evidence. Precedent. Her nickname among courthouse staff was the Gavel, not because she slammed it often, but because when she did, it meant something was over. Final. 3 years on the bench, and no one had ever seen her flinch. But late at night, after the courtroom lights were dimmed and her robe was hung neatly behind her office door, she reviewed Osmond Jarrett's case with something close to discomfort. She read everything, twice. His service record, Bronze Star. Field Medic. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Paralyzed in an IED blast during an evac mission. No criminal record. His life afterward, quiet, consistent. Raised his niece after his sister's sudden death. Volunteered at local shelters. Donated his VA checks during the pandemic to struggling neighbors. The kind of man who never asked for applause because he didn't think kindness was extraordinary. But this case was different. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just, quiet. Measured. The footage played again on her screen. Frame by frame, she watched Carlin back away from Brett Donegan, her shoulders nearly brushing a trash can. Brett's hands moved aggressively. His mouth spat something the mic didn't catch. Osmond, 30 feet away, never took his eyes off Carlin. Then came the movement, no hesitation, no delay. Just one clean strike. Greaves paused. Rewound. Played it again. What she couldn't understand was why it stuck with her so deeply. And then, from somewhere in memory, she heard her father's voice. Harlan Greaves, Vietnam veteran. A man who spoke few words, but meant all of them. If you ever see a man protect a child without being asked, he once told her, you're looking at someone who doesn't need a badge to know right from wrong. She hadn't thought about that in decades. But it came back now. Clear. Solid. Just like Osmond's actions. The law didn't account for intent in the way people hoped. It measured action. Injury. Precedent. But sometimes, rarely, there was room for something more. Still, as the trial date neared, she told herself, this is just another case. But the town didn't think so. By the time the trial began, Courtroom 2B was packed. Not with legal scholars or courtroom junkies, but with neighbors. Mechanics. Librarians. Teachers. People who didn't go to courtrooms unless they were paying a parking ticket or serving jury duty. But today, they came early. Sat quietly. Waited. Carlin sat on the second row, between her school counselor and Mrs. Ruther, the neighbor who always brought over cornbread on Wednesdays. She clutched her backpack like a life vest. When Judge Greaves entered, the room rose. Even those in the hallway stood, just from the ripple of silence her presence created. Reggie Vallon adjusted his tie. Again. His nerves weren't just about losing. They were about losing for someone who deserved better. You ready? He whispered to Osmond. Osmond didn't nod. Just said, doesn't matter if I'm ready. I'm here. The prosecution went first. Melinda Portis, assistant DA, presented the charge in her usual clipped, confident style. The facts, she began, are not complicated. She detailed the blow, the injury. The medical costs. This was not self-defense, she insisted. This was not life or death. This was retaliation. Then she added the line that changed the room's temperature. And while we respect Mr. Jarrett's military service, let us be clear, service history does not excuse violence in civilian life. That statement caused an almost invisible shift in the courtroom. A twitch of the judge's eyebrow. A murmur beneath the breath of a man in the back row. Even the court reporter's fingers seemed to pause for half a beat. Then it was Reggie's turn. He stood slowly. Carefully. Because you don't fight fire with fire when you're defending a man like Osmond Jarrett. You fight it with clarity. My client doesn't deny that contact occurred, Reggie began. But let's be clear, this wasn't a bar fight. This wasn't some man with a temper boiling over. This was a veteran watching his only living family, a 15-year-old girl, get cornered by a man twice her size. He turned slightly to face the jury, a mix of retired workers, a high school teacher, a mechanic, a daycare manager. Not hardened types, but people who knew fear when they saw it. "One strike," Reggie said. "No weapon. No pursuit. No rage." And afterward? He didn't run. He didn't shout. He waited. Brett Donegan took the stand next. Even dressed up, he looked uncomfortable. He recited his version, short, clipped. "I was talking to the girl. She bumped into my nephew. I asked her to be more aware." "You didn't raise your voice?" Reggie asked. "I don't recall." "You didn't block her path?" "I was just standing there." "Did you step toward her?" "Not aggressively." Reggie raised an eyebrow. "And yet, a man in a wheelchair thought it was necessary to defend her." Brett didn't answer. Just looked away. Then it was Carlin's turn. She looked impossibly small in the witness chair. Her voice thin but clear. "I bumped into the kid. I said sorry. But he started yelling at me. Got close. Said we didn't belong there. Did you feel threatened?" Reggie asked gently. She nodded. "What did you feel?" She looked up. Her voice didn't crack. "I was scared. That was it." No tears. No dramatic testimony. But those words lingered. Even Judge Greaves paused her note-taking. Osmond hadn't looked up once. He just stared at the table. His hands folded, a clean white tissue tucked between his fingers. Untouched. And the whole courtroom knew, this case wasn't about a punch anymore. It was about everything that came before it. And everything that could have come after, if Osmond hadn't acted. As Carlin stepped down from the witness stand, every eye in the courtroom followed her, not out of curiosity, but out of respect. She moved slowly, her backpack clutched in both arms, as if the fabric held her together. When she sat, Osmond reached back and lightly patted her knee. No words. Just presence. Judge Greaves kept her expression neutral, but her pen didn't move for a while. That afternoon, closing arguments began. The prosecution remained clinical. "We understand the emotional testimony," Melinda Portis said, "but emotion is not justification. This is a court of law. And the law doesn't bend for personal sentiment." Reggie rose slowly. "That's true. The law shouldn't bend," he said, pacing gently in front of the jury. "But it should see. And what happened outside that grocery store wasn't chaos, it was clarity. A moment when one man, sitting down, saw something and acted. He looked straight at them. Ask yourselves, if that were your niece? If that were your child, and you had no legs, no badge, no backup, just one decision, would you make it?" There was no closing flourish. No slam dunk moment. Just a question left hanging in the air. And that's when Judge Greaves asked something unexpected. "Mr. Jarrett," she said quietly, "would you like to speak before I announce the sentence?" Osmond rolled slightly forward, his hands resting on the armrests of his chair. His voice, when it came, was steady. Not loud. But it echoed. "I'm not here to be seen as a hero. Or a victim. I hit a man. That's the truth. But I didn't do it out of anger. I did it because my niece, my sister's only child, was scared. And I couldn't sit still and watch that." He turned slightly toward the jury. "She's just a kid. Her mama died too early. She's just trying to stay safe in a world that doesn't always like seeing girls like her in certain places." He paused. "I've lived long enough to know how fast a moment can go wrong. I've seen it on foreign soil. I've treated wounds I couldn't close. And I've buried people I couldn't save." He drew a breath. "So I made a choice. And if I had to make it again, I probably still would. No dramatics. No pleading. Just the truth. Judge Greaves sat motionless for a long time after. Her fingers pressed lightly to her lips, elbows on the bench. Then, finally, she said the words no one expected. "Court will resume tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for sentencing." She struck the gavel once and left. People didn't move right away. It felt sacred, somehow. Like walking out too soon would ruin something. Outside the courthouse, Reggie didn't speak to the cameras. Neither did Osmond. But Carlin stayed close to her uncle's side, gripping his hand so tight her knuckles were white. "You were shaking," she said softly. Osmond gave a tired smile. "Not bad for an old man, huh?" She didn't laugh. "Not this time. You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. "But sometimes, you still try." That night, footage from the courtroom trickled out onto social media. Clips of Osmond rising from his wheelchair, or trying to, were posted and reposted. Some praised him. Some called it a stunt. But most were just stunned. The story even made it to regional news. Then national. Talk show hosts debated whether the judge had crossed a line. Analysts questioned if she'd shown bias. But on Reeves Avenue, where Osmond lived, no one cared what they said. Because the man in that video was their neighbor. Their friend. The guy who once fixed an old woman's porch railing with his own money. And more importantly, he was Carlin's uncle. At school, Carlin walked taller the next day. Not because she wanted attention. But because something had shifted. The school counselor emailed Osmond later that week. "She's quieter, but sharper. Asked to tutor younger students. Said she wants them to learn how to speak up for themselves." Osmond read the message twice before closing his laptop and wheeling outside to sit on the porch. He stared at the stars for a long time. He didn't need the world to understand him. But he hoped the judge had. And she did. Judge Greaves spent that night differently than any night in her 3 years on the bench. She didn't go home right away. She sat in her chambers alone, the courthouse silent around her. On her desk was a photo of her father, a grainy black and white shot from the 1970s. No medals. No gun. Just a man with strong shoulders, holding a rake outside their childhood home. She whispered aloud to no one. "I saw him in that man today." She closed her eyes. Not to sleep. But to remember. The next morning, courtroom 2B was filled beyond capacity. Word had spread, not just about the case, but about what had happened the day before. About the man in the wheelchair who tried to rise. About the judge who walked out mid-sentencing. About the quiet words spoken not in defiance, but in truth. Some came in support. Others came to see a verdict. And a few came just because they didn't know what else to do. Carlin sat next to Osmond in the waiting area before court. She didn't say much, just quietly fidgeted with the straps of her backpack. "You nervous?" Osmond asked. She didn't answer right away. "Then, only if you are." He gave her a faint grin. "Guess that makes 2 of us." When the doors opened, people flooded in. Even the press had arrived early, though none of them dared approach the bench, not after the silence the judge commanded the day before. But something was different today. Judge Renata Greaves walked in without her robe. Just a dark blazer over a white blouse. Her hair was tied back, her glasses already placed on the desk. Her presence was still sharp, but not as steel-clad as before. "This is a sentencing hearing," she began. Her voice was firm, but softened by something human. "And I want to make it clear, this is not about opinions. This is about law." She paused. But even within the law, there is room for clarity. And sometimes clarity only comes when we stop looking at files, and start listening to people. The courtroom went still. "Mr. Jarrett," she said softly, "you have the floor." Osmond rolled forward slowly, adjusted the mic. His voice was calm, quiet, but carried an unmistakable weight. "When I came back from the war," he said, "I promised myself I would never raise my hand in anger again. I'd seen too much of what anger did. What it cost. I came back with wheels instead of legs and figured that was the price I paid." He looked down briefly, then continued. "But that day outside the store, it wasn't anger. It was fear. Not for me. For Carlin." He glanced behind him at his niece. She looked up, tears forming in her eyes. "She's all I have left of my sister. And I promised I'd protect her." He paused. "I didn't mean to hurt that man. But I did mean to stop him." The courtroom didn't move. It was like time itself had slowed, waiting on Judge Greaves to respond. And then, she did something no one expected. She took off her glasses, folded her hands on the desk, and looked at Osmond directly. "I have reviewed your service record. Your community involvement. Your lack of prior convictions. I've read the statements from neighbors, from teachers, from people who know you not as a defendant, but as a man." She stopped again. And then, in a voice not loud, but clear, "Mr. Jarrett, please rise." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Not outrage, confusion. Reggie glanced over, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Carlin clutched her backpack tighter. Osmond didn't flinch. He knew. Without a word, he placed his palms on the wheelchair's arms. Again. He pushed. Every muscle in his arms strained. His jaw clenched tight. His chest heaved. Slowly, inch by inch, he lifted himself up. Not fully. Not even halfway. But he rose, enough to be seen. Enough to be known. Then, as before, his body gave out. He collapsed back into the chair with a quiet exhale. No one laughed. No one looked away. Because this wasn't failure. It was something more powerful than standing, trying, in front of the world, when you didn't have to. Judge Greaves stood from the bench, abruptly. Turned. And left the room. Again. Only this time, people understood. She was gone for nearly 3 minutes. But it felt like longer. When she returned, her face was different. Her voice too. "This court is not just a place where laws are upheld," she said, "it is a place where lives are weighed. And today, I'm weighing more than evidence. I'm weighing intention. Restraint. Responsibility." She looked directly at Osmond. "You will not serve jail time." A sharp breath escaped from Carlin's throat. The judge continued. "You will complete 80 hours of community service. And attend 6 months of counseling. Not because I believe you are a threat, but because even the strongest among us deserve space to process pain." Then, softly, sentence delivered. Court is adjourned. She struck the gavel once. No one moved. No one wanted to be the first to leave. It wasn't just a sentence. It was a moment. Sacred. Heavy. Final. Carlin leaned into her uncle's shoulder, hugging him tightly. He didn't return it right away. He was staring at the judge, still seated, still watching him. And that silence, that long, unbroken silence, was louder than any verdict. When the gavel struck, it echoed more than the court walls, it rippled into lives. And yet, no one rushed to their feet. No shuffle of papers. No stampede for the door. People just sat, still caught in the emotional undertow of what they'd witnessed. Osmond turned slowly, his chair creaking, his hand still resting lightly on Carlin's. Reggie leaned in and whispered, "That's it." Osmond didn't speak. He just nodded, not in relief, not in triumph, but in quiet understanding. Justice hadn't been loud today. It had been deliberate. And human. As they rolled down the aisle toward the exit, a voice called out from behind. Mr. Jarrett. They turned. A juror, gray-haired, floral blouse, soft drawl, stood near the jury box. I just wanted to say, thank you. For how you carried yourself. Osmond gave her a nod. That was all. And it was enough. Outside, the press was waiting. Microphones jutted like daggers. Cameramen jockeyed for position. Mr. Jarrett, how do you feel about the sentence? Was the judge's reaction staged? Do you think you got off easy because of sympathy? Reggie shielded Osmond, stepping between him and the reporters. Justice, he told them, isn't always loud. Today, it was just, honest. Osmond kept rolling forward, right past the flashing bulbs and barking voices. Carlin matched his pace, still clutching her backpack, her shoulders a little straighter. When they reached the sidewalk, she looked at him and asked, do you think anyone actually saw? He glanced at her. They saw, he said. Even if they don't know what they were looking at. Later that evening, local and national networks ran shortened clips of the courtroom footage. Commentary followed. Some praised Judge Greaves for her humanity. Others accused her of performative emotion. A few legal analysts debated whether her robeless appearance at sentencing set a risky precedent. But Osmond didn't care. He sat on his porch with Carlin, a bowl of peach cobbler between them, a gift from Mrs. Ruther, still warm. I heard kids at school are talking about it, Carlin said. Osmond chuckled. What, that I fell on my behind in court? She shook her head. They said you stood. He didn't respond at first. Then. Funny how the truth bends. Sometimes it's the fall that gets remembered. Sometimes, it's the trying. Inside the courthouse, Judge Renata Greaves sat alone in her chambers. Her desk lamp flickered faintly as she held an old photograph, her father, standing in front of their childhood home, rake in hand. No uniform. No medals. Just a man who believed in doing what's right. I saw him today, she whispered, in that man. 3 days later, the buzz around the case began to settle. New headlines emerged. New court filings. Dothan returned to its rhythm. But in quiet pockets of the town, the story lingered. At the youth center near Fort Rucker, Osmond began his community service. Not because he was forced, because it made sense. Structure was familiar. Discipline was comforting. And teaching gave him purpose. The kids didn't know who he was at first. Just another adult asking them to keep their voices down and stop throwing dodgeballs at the windows. But they noticed things. He remembered their names. Asked questions about their families. Gave them space to speak. He wasn't loud. He didn't lecture. He listened. One afternoon, a wiry kid named Raymond, maybe 11, walked up to him after a workshop on conflict resolution. You ever hit somebody who deserved it? Osmond didn't flinch. He didn't laugh. Yeah, he said. Once. Raymond blinked. You in trouble? I was. Not anymore. You regret it? Osmond leaned in slightly. Every day. Raymond nodded, like that made sense. Even if it didn't, yet. Meanwhile, at school, Carlin returned to class with new energy. Her science teacher emailed Osmond. She's volunteering more. Leading group projects. Helped a younger girl write her speech for assembly. She said she wanted others to know how to speak up. Osmond read the message, smiled, and quietly slid his phone into a drawer next to an old photo of his sister. Judge Greaves never mentioned the case again from the bench. But her demeanor shifted. Not obviously. She was still efficient. Still composed. Still firm. But there was a softness around the edges now. A pause before her gavel. A question or two more before sentencing. And then, one Saturday morning, a beige sedan pulled up to a red brick house on Reeves Avenue. Osmond was outside, watering the grass from his chair, a long-handled hose resting across his lap. Judge Renata Greaves stepped out. No robe. No press. Just her. "You expecting someone?" she asked, stepping closer. "Nope," he said calmly. "But I'm guessing I know why you're here." "I won't stay long," she said, glancing around. "I just wanted to see how you're doing." "I'm all right. The girl's better." "That's good." She adjusted her watch, a nervous tick rather than a need. "You know," she said quietly, "my father served in Vietnam. Came back, different. Didn't talk about it. But he always said something that stuck." "What was that?" "If a man protects a child without being asked," she repeated slowly, "he doesn't need a badge to prove anything." Osmond didn't smile. Didn't nod. But something behind his eyes shifted. "If you came to apologize," he said, "I don't need it." She met his gaze. "If I came to understand?" He shrugged slightly. "That's different." She smiled, barely. Maybe that was enough. She turned to leave, walking slowly back to her car. Osmond watched her drive off, the hose still trickling at his side. He didn't move. But in that moment, something in the air felt lighter. 3 months passed. The media storm faded. The headlines vanished. Courtroom to be moved on to new defendants, new charges, new names to be read and judged. But in Dothan, and especially on Reeves Avenue, people remembered. The house with the red bricks and the perfectly hung flag remained the same. So did the man who lived in it. But something in the town had shifted. A quiet ripple that moved through conversations, classrooms, and street corners. Osmond still wheeled himself down to the youth center twice a week. Sometimes more. Not just to log service hours, but because he found meaning there. He taught the kids how to plant herbs in raised garden beds. How to breathe before reacting. How to tell the truth, even when it hurt. He never mentioned the trial. Never talked about Brett Donegan or the courtroom. But the kids knew. Most had seen the clip. Or heard their cousins whisper about the man in the wheelchair who tried to stand in court. One day, during a writing exercise, a shy girl named Jory raised her hand. "Mr. Oz," she asked, "did it hurt?" Osmond didn't pretend not to understand. "Yeah," he said. "It did. But not the part you think." She nodded and went back to her drawing, satisfied. Meanwhile, Carlin had joined the student council at her high school. At a school assembly, she gave a short speech about community and safety. She spoke with clarity, not because she liked the spotlight, but because she knew what silence had cost her that day outside Walter's Market. Osmond waited in the van outside the school during her speech. She came out smiling, a small ribbon in hand. "They gave me this," she said, "for speaking up." He looked at the ribbon, then kissed her forehead. "Your mama would have framed that thing." Judge Renata Greaves continued her duties, but the courthouse staff noticed subtle changes. She asked more questions. Spent more time reading personal statements. Considered not just what defendants did, but why. She and Osmond never spoke again. No phone calls. No letters. Just that quiet moment on the porch that didn't need repeating. But every time she drove past Reeves Avenue, her eyes drifted to the red brick house. And something in her posture softened. One Friday afternoon, Osmond received a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Routine paperwork. Updates on claim status. But at the bottom was a handwritten note from a caseworker named Cliff Riggins. "Saw the clip of you in court. Just wanted to say, you did more for that room in one moment than most do in a lifetime. Respect." Osmond folded the letter carefully and tucked it in a kitchen drawer next to an old photo, Janira holding a toddler Carlin, both smiling in a patch of sunlight. He sat there for a while. The court had moved on. The cameras had disappeared. But for him, that moment, that single breath in which he tried to stand, still echoed. Because it hadn't been about rising from a chair. It had been about being seen. About showing a room full of strangers, and a girl who looked up to him, that dignity doesn't depend on legs or law books or even who sits behind the bench. Dignity is trying. Especially when you don't have to. That evening, he rolled out to the porch just as the sun dipped over Dothan. Across the street, some kids were playing football, the shrill laughter of tag and touchdowns filling the air. One boy waved. Osmond raised a hand in return. Carlin stepped outside with a notebook. She sat beside him. Uncle Oz? Yeah. You ever wish you'd done it different? He didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the sky, lit up in bands of gold and ash. No, he said at last. But I do wish it didn't have to happen at all. She nodded. People still talk about it at school, she said. But not like it's a bad thing. They say you stood. Even when you couldn't. Osmond chuckled, just a little. Funny how the truth works. Sometimes it bends. Sometimes it sticks. She leaned against his arm. Yours stuck. They sat together, watching the last of the day fade away. No words needed. Because justice, real justice, isn't just about punishment. Or mercy. It's about what we choose to see, when the truth shows up in a way we didn't expect. And whether we're brave enough to carry it forward. In that small courtroom in Dothan, Alabama, a paralyzed black veteran showed us that dignity isn't something granted, it's something owned. Osmond Jarrett didn't stand to defy a judge. He stood to remind a room, and a country, what true strength looks like. As he said, sometimes, you still try. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to True Echo for more powerful, emotional, and real stories like this. Drop a comment below, what would you have done in Osmond's shoes? And share this with someone who needs to be reminded. Strength isn't always loud, sometimes, it's the silence after you try.